Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Time Stories channel. I am so happy you found your way here. I would like to start by saying that I'm new to YouTube, and my videos may not have the best quality, but I am doing my best to improve. I am a one-man team, and all I can do is learn by doing mistakes. I really enjoy making these videos, especially doing research for them, and I hope you will enjoy them too. If you do, before you get cozy and ready to fall asleep, please leave a like, or maybe even subscribe. Let us begin. Tonight, we will travel gently through time, starting in the 1830s, when electricity was still a mystery, moving through the careful construction of networks that spanned continents, and arriving slowly at the present, where connection has become as natural as breathing. Some of what you hear tonight may surprise you, or at the very least remind you that every simple thing you do, every call you make, rests on generations of quiet innovation. Before anyone dreamed of hearing a voice across distance, there was the telegraph. In the 1830s and 1840s, inventors across Europe and America were experimenting with electricity, that strange force that could flow through metal and make things move, spark, or click. Samuel Morse, working in the United States, developed a practical system by 1844. His telegraph was simple: a key, a wire, a receiver. Press the key, and electricity flowed. Release it, and the flow stopped. At the other end, an electromagnet clicked in rhythm with your fingers. It wasn't speech. It wasn't even letters, really. It was code. Dots and dashes, short pulses and long ones. But that was enough. For the first time in human history, a message could travel faster than a horse, faster than a ship, arriving almost instantly across miles of empty space. The clicking of a telegraph key in New York could be heard, translated, understood in Philadelphia within seconds. It was a kind of magic that ran on copper and ingenuity. The telegraph spread quickly. By the 1850s, wires crisscrossed cities and stretched between them, strung along roads and railways. Messages flowed. News that once took days now took minutes. The world began to shrink, pulled closer by invisible threads humming with electric pulses. But the telegraph had limits. It required trained operators who knew Morse code. It was text, not voice. And though it connected people, it didn't let them truly speak. That would come later, built on the foundation the telegraph had laid. To send a telegraph message from one city to another, you needed more than wire. You needed posts, poles, towers, something to hold the copper lines above the ground, away from moisture and interference, stretching them across fields and over rivers. And so began one of the great invisible transformations of the 19th century. The wiring of the world. Wooden poles, tall and straight, were set into the earth along roads and railroad tracks. Crews of workers moved across the countryside, digging holes, raising timber, stringing wire between ceramic insulators. These poles became a new feature of the landscape, marching in lines that followed the contours of civilization. Where people went, the wires followed. Where wires went, information could flow. By the 1860s, thousands of miles of telegraph line connected major cities in the United States and Europe. In 1861, the first transcontinental telegraph line linked the east and west coasts of America, making the Pony Express obsolete almost overnight. In 1866, after several failed attempts, a telegraph cable was successfully laid across the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, connecting Europe and North America. Messages that once took weeks by ship now crossed in minutes, transmitted through a copper thread lying in cold darkness 2 miles beneath the waves. The world had never been so small, so connected, and the infrastructure to support it was only beginning. In the 1870s, a Scottish-born teacher and inventor named Alexander Graham Bell was working on something different. He was fascinated by sound, by speech, by the mechanics of hearing. His mother was deaf. His father had developed a system of visible speech for teaching the deaf to speak. Bell understood that sound was vibration, waves traveling through air, and he wondered if those vibrations could be turned into electrical signals and sent down a wire, just like the telegraph's clicks. Others were working on similar ideas. Elisha Gray, Antonio Meucci, and others were experimenting with acoustic telegraphy. But Bell, working with his assistant Thomas Watson, made a crucial breakthrough. On March 10, 1876, in a small workshop in Boston, Bell spoke into his experimental device. "Mr. Ennett, Watson, come here. I want to see you." And in another room, Watson heard him. Not in code, not in clicks, in voice. Human voice, traveling through wire, arriving faint and distorted, but unmistakably real. It was not a perfect transmission. The voice was weak, the words unclear, but it worked. For the first time, a human voice had crossed space through electricity. Bell patented his invention that same year, and, though legal battles would follow, though others would claim credit, history would remember this moment. The telephone had been born, a device that would, over the next century and a half, rewire society as profoundly as the telegraph had, but in a deeper way. Because now, we could not only send information, we could speak. We could hear a loved one's voice from far away. Distance began to collapse, not just for messages, but for connection itself. The first telephones were nothing like the sleek devices we know today. They were crude assemblies of wood, metal, and wire. A mouthpiece made of thin membrane that vibrated when you spoke. A receiver that turned electrical signals back into sound waves you could hear. No dial, no buttons. Just two ends of a conversation, connected by a single, dedicated line. If you wanted to call someone in those early days, you needed a wire running directly from your telephone to theirs. One line, one connection. This worked for a small office or between two specific buildings, but it couldn't scale. You couldn't have a separate wire for every person you might want to call. The tangle would be impossible. And so, even as Bell demonstrated his invention, even as investors began to see its potential, a fundamental question remained. How do you let anyone call anyone? How do you build a network? The answer would require more than just better telephones. It would require operators, switchboards, exchanges. It would require an entirely new infrastructure, built on top of the telegraph's poles and wires, but far more complex. The telephone wasn't just a device. It was the seed of a system, a web of connection that would grow slowly, patiently, across the world. By the 1880s, telephone companies were forming, and the first exchanges were opening in cities across America and Europe. An exchange was a central location, where all the telephone lines in an area converged. If you wanted to call someone, you picked up your telephone and it sent a signal to the exchange. There, a human operator, usually a woman, would answer. You told her who you wanted to reach, and she physically connected your line to theirs by plugging a cable into the correct socket on a large switchboard. These switchboards were intricate things, panels covered with rows and rows of jacks, each representing a telephone line. When a call came in, a small light would illuminate, or a shutter would drop, signaling the operator. She would plug in her headset, ask who you wanted to speak to, then insert a second plug into the destination jack, completing the circuit. Your voice could now flow through the wires, through the switchboard, to the other telephone. When the conversation ended, she would unplug the cables and wait for the next call. The operators were essential. They were the living heart of the network. The switchboard, a kind of mechanical brain that only worked because human hands guided it. They worked long shifts in rooms filled with clicking, buzzing, and the constant hum of voices. It was exhausting, precise work. But it made the telephone network possible. Without operators, the system couldn't function. And so for decades, every phone call passed through human hands. In the early days of telephone service, running individual lines to every home was expensive. Copper wire cost money. Poles and installation cost money. And so, telephone companies developed a practical solution. The party line. Instead of giving each household its own dedicated line to the exchange, multiple households, sometimes 5 or 10, would share a single line. This meant that, when you picked up your telephone, you might hear your neighbors already talking. You shared the line with them. Each household on the party line had a specific ring pattern, a code of long and short rings, so you'd know which calls were meant for you. 2 short rings might be yours. 1 long ring might be the Johnsons down the road. You learned to listen for your pattern and ignore the others. But privacy was fragile. Anyone on the party line could pick up their phone and listen to your conversation. And they did. Eavesdropping was common, sometimes malicious, sometimes just curious. People heard each other's business, their arguments, their secrets. The party line was a shared space, a kind of acoustic commons where the boundaries between households blurred. It was frustrating, invasive, but also strangely communal. And for many rural areas, it was the only affordable way to have telephone service at all. Party lines persisted in some places well into the 1970s and 1980s, long after private lines had become standard in cities. Before electric power became widely available, telephones needed a way to generate their own electricity to send signals. The solution was the magneto, a small hand-cranked generator built into the telephone. When you wanted to make a call, you turned a crank on the side of the phone. This spun a magnet inside a coil of wire, generating an electrical current that traveled down the line to the exchange, ringing a bell or lighting a signal to alert the operator. These magnetophones were common from the 1880s through the 1930s, especially in rural areas. They were sturdy, wooden boxes mounted on walls with a crank handle on the side, a mouthpiece jutting forward, and a separate earpiece hanging on a hook. To place a call, you lifted the earpiece, turned the crank vigorously, usually in a specific pattern for your exchange, and waited for the operator to respond. Then you told her who you wanted to reach. The cranking became a familiar ritual. A certain number of turns for a local call, perhaps more for long distance. Children were sometimes enlisted to do the cranking, their small hands turning the handle while adults spoke. The magnetophone was mechanical, tactile, requiring effort. You couldn't make a call passively. You had to work for it, turning kinetic energy into connection. It was one more layer of labor in the process of reaching someone far away, a reminder that communication, even then, required energy and intention. As telephone networks expanded in the late 1800s, the infrastructure grew denser. The same wooden poles that had carried telegraph wires now held telephone lines as well. And in cities, the poles sprouted cross arms stacked high with wires. Dozens of lines, sometimes hundreds, strung between buildings and along streets. The sky above became a tangle of black threads, crossing and recrossing, humming faintly in the wind. These poles were everywhere, along main streets and back alleys, beside railroad tracks and country roads. Workers climbed them with spiked boots and leather belts, stringing new wires, repairing broken ones, splicing connections. In winter, ice could weigh the lines down until they snapped. In storms, wind could tear whole sections loose. Maintaining the network was constant, unglamorous work done by linesmen who understood that every conversation depended on the integrity of these thin copper strands. In some cities, the web of overhead wires became so thick that it darkened the streets below. Photographs from the 1880s and 1890s show intersections in New York, Chicago, and other cities where the sky is nearly invisible behind a chaos of crossing wires. It was messy, tangled, but it was also the physical manifestation of connection, proof that voices were flowing, that the city was speaking to itself. Over time, many cities would move their wires underground, burying them in conduits beneath the streets. But in rural areas, wooden poles and overhead wires remained the standard for decades. A familiar feature of the American landscape. In the beginning, there were so few telephones that everyone who had one knew everyone else who had one. But as exchanges grew, as more homes and businesses connected, keeping track became difficult. Who had a phone? How could you reach them? And so, telephone companies began publishing directories, simple lists of names and numbers. The first telephone book was issued in New Haven, Connecticut in 1878. It was a single page, 50 names, no numbers, because numbers hadn't been assigned yet, just names and sometimes addresses. If you wanted to call someone, you told the operator their name, and she made the connection. As networks grew, numbers were introduced to make the system more efficient, and the directories grew thicker. These early telephone books were functional, unadorned. They told you who was connected and how to reach them. Over time, they would evolve into the thick volumes we remember from the 20th century, filled with residential listings, business pages, and yellow pages for services. But in the beginning, they were modest things, proof that the network was expanding, that connection was becoming common enough to require organization, cataloging, a written map of who could speak to whom. As more people subscribed to telephone service, the switchboards at the exchanges had to grow. What started as small panels with a few dozen jacks expanded into massive walls of connections, sometimes stretching across entire rooms. In large cities like New York, Chicago, and London, The central exchanges employed hundreds of operators working in shifts around the clock, sitting in rows before these towering switchboards, plugging and unplugging cables in constant motion. The work was exhausting and required focus. Operators had to be fast, accurate, polite. They memorized the locations of jacks, learned to recognize voices, and managed multiple calls simultaneously. They wore headsets and spoke in calm, practiced tones. "Number, please." It was repetitive labor, but it was also skilled. A good operator could connect a call in seconds, routing it through the correct paths, sometimes coordinating with operators at other exchanges if the call was long distance. The switchboards themselves were marvels of organization. Each jack was labeled, each row and column mapped. Lights blinked, bells rang softly, cords draped across the panels like vines, and through it all, voices flowed, routed by human hands and minds. It was a system that worked, but it was also fragile, limited by the speed and endurance of the people who ran it. As call volumes grew, as cities swelled, the limitations became clear. There had to be a better way. Making a call within your city was relatively simple. One operator, one switchboard, a quick connection. But calling someone in another city, especially before the 1920s, was a complex process involving multiple operators and exchanges. Your call had to be routed through a chain of connections, each one handled manually. If you wanted to call someone in a distant city, you told your local operator. She would contact an operator at a regional toll center. That operator would connect to another exchange and another, passing the call along a chain of wires and switchboards until it finally reached the destination city, where a local operator would complete the connection to the person you were calling. Each link in the chain had to be established by hand, and each operator had to log the call, note the time, and eventually calculate the charges. Long-distance calls were expensive, slow. You often had to schedule them in advance, booking a time when the necessary operators and lines would be available. When the call finally connected, you might hear a series of clicks and hums, the ghosts of all those intermediate connections. The sound quality was often poor, voices faint and distorted by the distance they'd traveled. But even so, it was miraculous. You could speak to someone hundreds or thousands of miles away, your voice carried through copper wires, through the careful labor of a dozen operators, arriving faint but real on the other end. By the early 1900s, inventors were working on systems that could route calls automatically without human operators. The most successful of these was the Stroger switch, invented by Almond Stroger, an undertaker who reportedly distrusted telephone operators after suspecting they were directing business to a competitor. His automatic switch, patented in 1891, used electromagnets and mechanical selectors to route calls based on the numbers dialed. The Stroger system worked like this. When you dialed a number, each digit sent a series of electrical pulses down the line. These pulses controlled mechanical switches inside the exchange, moving selectors up and around in a precise dance until they found the correct connection. It was slower than a skilled operator, at least at first, but it worked without human intervention. And crucially, it could operate 24 hours a day without rest, without error from fatigue or distraction. The first automatic exchanges using Strauger switches were installed in the 1890s, but adoption was slow. Many telephone companies resisted, invested as they were in their operator workforce and the existing infrastructure. But gradually, automation spread. By the 1920s and 1930s, more cities were installing automatic exchanges, and the role of operators began to shift. They were still needed for long-distance calls, for assistance, for information. But for local calls, machines were taking over. The switchboards were shrinking. The future was mechanical, and eventually it would be electronic. As automatic switching became common, telephones needed a way for you to tell the system which number you wanted to reach. The solution was the rotary dial, a circular mechanism marked with the digits 0 through 9 and sometimes letters. To dial a number, you inserted your finger into the hole above the digit, pulled it around to a metal stop, and released. As the dial spun back to its resting position, it generated a series of electrical pulses corresponding to the number you dialed. If you dialed a 5, the phone sent 5 pulses. If you dialed a 9, it sent 9. The automatic switches at the exchange counted these pulses and moved their selectors accordingly, step by step, until the connection was made. It was a simple, elegant system. Mechanical, tactile. You could feel the dial spinning under your finger, hear the clicking as it returned. Dialing became a small ritual, a physical act of reaching out. Rotary phones became the standard in much of the world, from the 1920s through the 1980s. They were sturdy, reliable. The dials were made of metal or hard plastic, sometimes painted, sometimes left bare. Each number took time to dial, especially higher digits like 9 or 0. Dialing a long phone number was a deliberate process, requiring patience. You couldn't rush it. The system wouldn't let you. And if you missed dial, if your finger slipped, you had to hang up and start over. The rotary dial demanded attention, precision. It made calling someone an intentional act, not a thoughtless one. By the 1920s, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, known as AT&T, had grown into something unprecedented. A single corporation controlling most of the telephone service in the United States. It owned the long-distance lines, the local exchanges, the equipment manufacturers. It was a monopoly, sanctioned by the government under the reasoning that telephone service was a natural monopoly, that competition would lead to incompatible networks and chaos. The Bell system, as it was called, operated with remarkable consistency. Whether you were in New York or rural Montana, your telephone service came from the same company, worked the same way, used the same standards. This created uniformity, reliability. The phones were sturdy, the service dependable. But it also meant little innovation, little choice. The Bell system decided what telephones looked like, how they worked, what features they had. And for decades, they changed very slowly. The classic black rotary phone, heavy and solid, became the standard. It sat in American homes and offices, unchanging. A piece of infrastructure that felt as permanent as the wiring in the walls. The Bell system's control was so complete that you didn't own your telephone. You rented it from the company. If it broke, they repaired it. If you moved, they came and reinstalled it. The telephone was theirs. You just used it. And this arrangement would persist, largely unchallenged, until the 1970s and 1980s, when everything began to change. For decades, making a long-distance call meant speaking to an operator, waiting while she coordinated with other operators, and paying premium rates for the privilege. But in the 1950s and 1960s, AT&T began rolling out direct distance dialing, or DDD. This system allowed you to dial long-distance numbers yourself, using area codes to route your call automatically through the network. The first direct dialed long-distance call was made on November 10, 1951, when the mayor of Englewood, New Jersey, called the mayor of Alameda, California, without operator assistance. It was a symbolic moment, a demonstration of what was coming. Over the next 2 decades, the Bell system gradually upgraded exchanges across the country, installing the electronic switches and routing systems necessary to handle direct dialed calls. You still needed to dial more numbers, a 3-digit area code, then the 7-digit local number. It took longer, but it was yours to control. No waiting for an operator. No scheduling calls in advance. You could pick up the phone, dial, and within seconds hear it ringing on the other end, hundreds or thousands of miles away. The system routed your call automatically through a web of switches and trunk lines, finding the most efficient path. Long distance was still expensive, billed by the minute, but it was becoming more accessible. And the operators who had once connected every call were slowly reassigned to other roles or let go, their careful handwork replaced by machines that never rested. In 1963, AT&T introduced a new kind of telephone. Instead of a rotary dial, it had buttons, 12 of them arranged in a grid. The digits 0 through 9, plus 2 additional keys marked with symbols, asterisk, and pound. When you pressed a button, the phone generated 2 simultaneous tones, specific frequencies that represented that digit. The network could decode these tones almost instantly, much faster than counting the pulses from a rotary dial. Touch. Tone dialing, as it was called, was faster, easier, more precise. You could dial a number in seconds rather than the patient spinning required by rotary phones. The tones had a musical quality, each button producing a different combination of pitches. If you pressed them in sequence, you could create little melodies, accidental or intentional. Children discovered this immediately, playing with the buttons, making the phone sing. But adoption was slow at first. Touch tone service required upgraded equipment at the exchanges, and AT&T charged extra for it. Many people kept their rotary phones for years, decades even, seeing no reason to change. Touch tone phones coexisted with rotary models through the 1970s and 1980s. But gradually, the buttons won. They were simply better, faster, more suited to an era that was beginning to move more quickly. By the 1990s, rotary phones had become nostalgic relics, reminders of a slower, more deliberate way of connecting. For most of the Bell system's history, telephones came in one color: black. Heavy, glossy black plastic, or bakelite, a uniform object that matched every other telephone. But in the 1950s, as American consumer culture expanded, as homes filled with colorful appliances and furnishings, AT&T began offering telephones in different colors: beige, ivory, pink, turquoise, red. It seems like a small thing, but it was significant. For the first time, your telephone could reflect something about you: your taste, your home's decor. A pink princess phone in a teenager's bedroom. A Harvest Gold rotary phone in a 1970s kitchen. These colored phones became cultural symbols, small markers of personality in a world where technology was becoming more present, more domestic. The princess phone, introduced in 1959, was especially popular. It was smaller, lighter, with an illuminated dial that glowed softly at night. It was marketed toward women, toward bedrooms and personal spaces. The trimline phone, introduced in 1965, moved the dial from the base into the handset, creating a sleeker profile. These designs were subtle innovations, refinements. But they showed that telephones were no longer just utility devices. They were objects you lived with, and they could be beautiful, or at least pleasant to look at. Function was merging with form, slowly, cautiously, in the careful way that monopolies innovate when they don't have to worry about competition. For most of telephone history, if you weren't home when someone called, you simply missed the call. There was no record, no way to know who had tried to reach you. But in the 1960s and 1970s, answering machines began to appear. Early models were expensive, bulky devices that used magnetic tape to record incoming messages. You would set them up, record a greeting, and when a call came in and you didn't answer, the machine would play your greeting and then record the caller's message. The first answering machines were met with skepticism, even hostility. Many people found them impersonal, rude. Speaking to a machine felt strange, unsettling. Some callers would simply hang up rather than leave a message. But slowly, answering machines became more common, more accepted. By the 1980s, they were showing up in homes and businesses everywhere. Compact units that sat beside the telephone, their small cassette tapes whirring and clicking as they captured voices in your absence. There was something melancholic about coming home to a blinking light, messages waiting. You would press play and hear the voices of people who had called while you were out. Some urgent, some casual, some just checking in. The tape would rewind with a soft mechanical sound, ready for the next absence, the next call. Answering machines changed the rhythm of communication. You no longer had to be present to receive a message. Time became more flexible. Connection became asynchronous. It was a small step toward the world we live in now, where messages arrive constantly, stored indefinitely, waiting for us to notice them. For 100 years, telephones were tethered. A cord connected the handset to the base, and another cord connected the base to the wall jack. If you wanted to talk, you stood or sat near the phone, limited by the length of those cords. Some people bought extra long coiled cords that stretched across rooms. But you were always anchored, always pulled back by that physical connection. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, cordless phones began to appear. They used radio waves to transmit your voice from the handset to a base station plugged into the phone line. You could walk around your house, into other rooms, even outside within a certain range, and still talk. It was a small freedom, but it felt significant. You could pace while you talked. You could cook dinner, fold laundry, move through your life without having to stay in one place. Early cordless phones had limited range, maybe 50 to 100 feet, and the sound quality was often poor, prone to static and interference. If a neighbor had a cordless phone on the same frequency, you might pick up their conversations, or they might pick up yours. Privacy was fragile. But the convenience was undeniable. Cordless phones sold quickly, and manufacturers kept improving them, extending their range, improving clarity, adding features. The tether was breaking. Movement was becoming part of conversation, and this small liberation would pave the way for something much larger: the mobile phone. Before cell phones became small enough to fit in a pocket, there were car phones. Large, heavy devices installed in automobiles, connected to powerful transmitters and large antennas. The first car phones appeared in the 1940s and 1950s, but they were rare, expensive, available mostly to businesses and the very wealthy. They worked by connecting to a network of radio towers, each tower covering a limited area, a cell. To make a call from a car phone, you picked up the handset, and the system connected you to a mobile operator who would place your call. Later systems allowed direct dialing, but the process was slow, the connections often poor. Car phones required so much power that they had to be hardwired into the car's electrical system. The handsets were bulky, the equipment took up trunk space. But for people who needed to stay connected while traveling, for salespeople, executives, emergency responders, they were invaluable. The service was expensive. Monthly fees were high, and calls were charged by the minute at premium rates. Owning a car phone was a status symbol, a sign of importance or wealth. You would see them in luxury cars, the antenna a visible marker of connectivity. But the technology was advancing. Engineers were working on systems that could handle more users, more calls, smaller devices. The car phone was a stepping stone, an intermediate technology between the fixed telephone and the truly mobile device that was coming. For decades, the Bell System's monopoly had been challenged, investigated, debated. Critics argued that AT&T's control stifled innovation, kept prices high, prevented competition. The company argued that universal service required unified control, that fragmentation would harm consumers. But in 1974, the U.S. Department of Justice filed an antitrust lawsuit against AT&T, seeking to break up the monopoly. The case dragged on for years, through negotiations and legal battles. Finally, in 1982, AT&T agreed to divest itself of its local telephone companies. On January 1, 1984, the Bell System was officially dismantled. AT&T retained its long-distance service and manufacturing operations, but the local phone companies were split into 7 independent regional companies called the Baby Bells. The breakup changed everything. Suddenly, there was competition. Choice. You could buy your own telephone from any manufacturer, not just rent from the phone company. You could choose your long-distance carrier. New companies entered the market with new ideas, new technologies. The pace of innovation accelerated. Some people mourned the loss of the old system, its reliability and consistency. Others celebrated the new freedom, the possibilities that competition brought. The telephone industry would never be the same. The era of the monopoly was over, and the era of rapid change was beginning. In 1983, Motorola released the Dynatac 8000X, the first commercially available portable mobile phone. It was a brick, literally nicknamed the Brick, 10 inches tall, weighing nearly 2 pounds, with an antenna that protruded another few inches. It cost nearly $4,000, equivalent to about $12,000 today. The battery lasted 30 minutes of talk time, and took 10 hours to recharge. But it was portable. You could carry it with you, make calls from anywhere within range of the cellular network. The Dynatac was a status symbol, a piece of the future that only the wealthy could afford. You would see them in the hands of executives, real estate agents, early adopters who wanted to be reachable anywhere. The phones were conspicuous, impossible to miss. Using one in public drew stares, sometimes admiration, sometimes resentment. But beneath the novelty, something profound was happening. Communication was becoming untethered, not just from walls, but from places. You weren't calling a location anymore. You were calling a person. The cellular network that supported these phones was expanding rapidly. Towers were going up in cities, along highways. The country was being divided into cells, hexagonal regions, each served by a tower that could hand off your call to the next tower as you moved. It was a complex dance of radio waves and switching, but it worked. And as the technology improved, as phones became smaller and cheaper, as coverage expanded, mobile phones would transform from luxury items into everyday necessities. The first mobile phone networks were analog. Your voice was transmitted as a continuous radio wave, modulated to carry the sound. But analog systems had limitations. Limited capacity, poor sound quality, vulnerability to eavesdropping. In the 1990s, cellular networks began switching to digital transmission, encoding voice as streams of ones and zeros. Digital networks offered many advantages. They could pack more calls into the same radio spectrum, improving capacity. Sound quality was clearer, more consistent. And digital signals could be encrypted, making eavesdropping much harder. But the transition wasn't instant. For years, both analog and digital networks coexisted. Some phones could work on both systems, switching between them as needed. The shift to digital also enabled new features. Text messaging, or SMS, became possible, allowing short written messages to be sent between phones. At first, texting was awkward, requiring you to press number keys multiple times to spell out words. But it was cheap, often free, and it allowed silent communication. Young people especially embraced it, creating a new language of abbreviations and shorthand. Digital networks also laid the groundwork for data services, for the internet on phones, for everything that would come next. The transition from analog to digital was more than a technical upgrade. It was the foundation for the smartphone era. Through the 1990s, mobile phones got smaller. The brick-sized Dynatac gave way to smaller, lighter models. The Motorola Microtac, released in 1989, was the first flip phone, folding in half to become pocket-sized. The Motorola StarTAC, released in 1996, was even smaller, sleek and curved, weighing just 3.1 ounces. It was a marvel of miniaturization, a phone that felt almost weightless in your hand. As phones shrank, they became more personal, more intimate. They started to fit comfortably in pockets and purses. You could carry one all day without thinking about it. And as they became easier to carry, more people bought them. Mobile phones were transitioning from business tools to personal devices. By the late 1990s, it was becoming common to see people on the street, in restaurants, in parks, talking on small flip phones, the devices pressed to their ears. The shrinking wasn't just about convenience. It was about integration. Phones were becoming part of daily life, constant companions rather than occasional tools. They were with you when you woke up, when you went to work, when you returned home. The boundary between being connected and being disconnected was blurring. You were always reachable, always available. And this constant connectivity would only deepen in the years ahead. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, one company stood above all others in mobile phones. Nokia, a Finnish company that had started as a paper mill in the 19th century, had transformed itself into the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer. Their phones were everywhere. Reliable, affordable, well-designed. The Nokia 32010, released in 1999, sold over 160 million units. The Nokia 32010, released in 2000, became legendary for its durability and battery life. Nokia phones had a distinctive aesthetic. Curved plastic bodies, colorful faceplates you could swap out to customize your phone. Polyphonic ringtones that played simple melodies. And the game Snake, a simple addictive game where you controlled a growing line trying not to crash into itself. Millions of people played Snake on their Nokia phones, in waiting rooms, on buses, during idle moments. Nokia's success came from understanding what people wanted. Phones that worked, that lasted, that didn't require constant charging or careful handling. They weren't flashy or complicated. They made calls, sent texts, and did it reliably. But Nokia's dominance wouldn't last. They were focused on hardware, on making better versions of the phones they already made. They didn't see what was coming. The convergence of phones with computers, with the internet. The smartphone revolution that would change everything. SMS, or short message service, was originally designed as a way for cellular networks to send brief technical notifications. But in the 1990s, phone manufacturers added the ability for users to send text messages to each other. At first, it was clumsy. You had to press number keys multiple times to cycle through letters. To type hello, you pressed 4 twice for H, 3 twice for E, 5 3 times for L, 5 3 times for L again, 6 3 times for O. It was tedious. But texting had advantages. It was silent, discreet. You could communicate in situations where talking was inappropriate or impossible. In class, in meetings, in quiet places. Texting was also cheap, often included in phone plans or costing just a few cents per message. And crucially, it was asynchronous. You could send a message, and the recipient could read and respond when convenient. No need to coordinate schedules to catch someone when they were available. Young people especially embraced texting. They developed remarkable speed, their thumbs flying across the numeric keypads. A whole language emerged, abbreviations and acronyms designed to save keystrokes. LOL, BRB, OMG. Emoticons made from punctuation marks. By the early 2000s, texting had become a dominant form of communication for many people, especially teenagers and young adults. It was changing how people interacted, making communication more frequent, more casual, more constant. The phone was no longer just for calls. It was becoming a messaging device, a portal to ongoing conversation. In the early 2000s, manufacturers began adding small cameras to mobile phones. The first camera phones had terrible image quality, low resolution, poor color, no flash. The photos were grainy, blurry, barely usable. But they were there, built into the device you already carried everywhere. You didn't need a separate camera anymore. If something happened, if you saw something interesting, you could capture it immediately. The first widely popular camera phone was the Nokia 76T50, released in 2002. It had a 3-megapixel camera, which sounds laughable now, but was revolutionary then. People began taking photos of everyday moments, things they never would have bothered with before. Meals, friends, random observations. The photos weren't high quality, but that didn't matter. They were instant, shareable, part of the flow of life. As camera technology improved, as megapixels increased and lenses got better, phone photography became more serious. By the late 2000s, phone cameras were good enough to replace dedicated point-and-shoot cameras for many people. Social media platforms emerged, built around sharing photos. Instagram, Snapchat, platforms designed for images captured on phones. The camera phone changed how we document our lives, making photography constant, casual, integrated into every moment. We were no longer just carrying phones. We were carrying archives, memory machines that captured the world around us. In the mid-2000s, flip phones represented the pinnacle of mobile phone design. They were compact, stylish, satisfying to use. You flipped them open to answer a call, snapped them shut to hang up. That physical action, that small mechanical flourish, felt good. It gave weight to the act of ending a conversation. The Motorola Razr, released in 2004, became an icon. Impossibly thin, made of aluminum and glass, it sold over 130 million units worldwide. Flip phones had reached a kind of perfection. They had everything you needed: calls, texts, cameras, basic games, MP3 players, even primitive web browsers. They fit in pockets. They were durable. Their batteries lasted days. They were phones, and they were good at being phones. But they were also approaching a ceiling. There was only so much you could do with a numeric keypad and a small screen. The next evolution would require rethinking what a phone could be. And that rethinking was already happening. In research labs, in tech companies, designers and engineers were working on devices that would merge phones with computers, with the internet, with all the possibilities of digital technology. The flip phone would soon seem quaint, a relic of a simpler time. But for a few years, it represented the ideal. A phone that was elegant, functional, complete. It's no wonder people still feel nostalgic for them. Before the iPhone, before touchscreens became dominant, there was the BlackBerry. Research in Motion, a Canadian company, released the first BlackBerry devices in the early 2000s, and they were designed for one thing above all else: email. These were small devices with full QWERTY keyboards, physical keys you could feel under your thumbs. They had small screens, basic web browsers, but what they did brilliantly was push email directly to your phone, instantly, as it arrived. For business professionals, for people whose work depended on constant communication, BlackBerry was transformative. You could read and respond to emails anywhere, anytime, in meetings, on planes, while walking. The devices became addictive. People constantly checked them, thumbs moving rapidly over the tiny keyboards. They were nicknamed crackberries because of how compulsively people used them. The physical keyboard gave tactile feedback, a satisfying click with each letter, and experienced users could type remarkably fast without looking. BlackBerry devices also had BBM, BlackBerry Messenger, a proprietary messaging system that was fast, reliable, and secure. Among BlackBerry users, BBM became the preferred way to communicate, faster than SMS, more immediate than email. For a few years in the mid-2000s, BlackBerry dominated the smartphone market, especially among professionals and government workers. But their focus on business, on email and messaging, meant they missed what was coming. The broader vision of what a smartphone could be: a computer, a camera, an entertainment device, a window to everything. That vision would come from elsewhere. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Palm was a major player in personal digital assistants, or PDAs. These were small handheld devices with touchscreens used for calendars, contacts, notes, and simple applications. They used a stylus for input and a unique handwriting recognition system called graffiti. Palm devices were popular among professionals, students, anyone who wanted to organize their life digitally. Palm's natural evolution was to merge their PDAs with phones. The Palm Treo, released in 2002, combined a phone with Palm's organizing capabilities. It had a touchscreen, a physical keyboard, and ran Palm OS, which supported thousands of applications. You could make calls, send emails, browse the web, manage your schedule, all on one device. It was ahead of its time in many ways, a true smartphone before the term became common. But Palm struggled with the transition. Their operating system was aging, designed for simpler devices. They faced competition from BlackBerry on one side and, soon, from Apple and Google on the other. The Treo was innovative, but never achieved mass-market success. Palm tried to reinvent themselves with the Palm Pre in 2009, a beautiful device with a new operating system called WebOS. But it was too late. The smartphone war was already being won by others. Palm was eventually acquired and their technology absorbed. They were pioneers, visionaries even, but they couldn't compete with the giants that followed. On January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and introduced the iPhone. It looked like nothing else. A thin rectangular slab, mostly screen, with just one physical button on the front. No keyboard, no stylus. Just glass. Jobs demonstrated how it worked, touching the screen with his fingers, swiping, pinching, tapping. The interface was fluid, responsive, almost magical. You could scroll through contacts by flicking your finger. Zoom into photos by spreading your fingers apart. It felt natural, intuitive, like the screen was responding directly to your intentions. The iPhone combined a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator into one device. It had a real web browser, not the stripped-down mobile browsers of the time. Websites looked the way they were supposed to, just smaller. You could watch videos, listen to music, check email, browse the web, all on a beautiful color screen. The user interface was designed with care, with attention to detail that other phones lacked. Icons were glossy, three-dimensional. Transitions were smooth, animated. It felt like a glimpse of the future. When the iPhone launched on June 29, 2007, people lined up outside Apple stores for hours, sometimes days, to buy one. It was expensive. $4.99 or $5.99 depending on storage, and it only worked on one carrier, AT&T. But it didn't matter. People wanted it. Not just tech enthusiasts, but regular people who saw it and understood that something had shifted. The iPhone wasn't just a better phone. It was a new category of device. Within a few years, it would reshape the entire industry, forcing every other manufacturer to follow Apple's lead or disappear. Before the iPhone, most smartphones had physical keyboards. BlackBerries, Treos, early Windows mobile devices. They all had buttons you could press, keys you could feel. Many people insisted that physical keyboards were superior, that you couldn't type accurately on glass. But Apple bet on touchscreens, and they were right. The iPhone's touchscreen was capacitive, responding to the electrical properties of your finger rather than pressure. This made it sensitive, accurate. Apple also implemented autocorrect and predictive text, software that guessed what you were trying to type and fixed mistakes automatically. At first, typing on glass felt strange, imprecise. But people adapted. Within weeks, most users were typing as fast on the touchscreen as they had on physical keyboards, sometimes faster. The touchscreen had another advantage. It was flexible. Without physical keys, the screen could show anything. A keyboard when you needed to type, a video player when you wanted to watch something, a game interface, a map, anything. The screen became whatever the software needed it to be. This flexibility was crucial. It meant the iPhone could evolve through software updates, adding features and capabilities that would have required new hardware on traditional phones. Other manufacturers resisted at first. Nokia, BlackBerry, and others continued making phones with physical keyboards, believing their customers wanted them. But one by one, they switched to touchscreens. By the early 2010s, the physical keyboard had almost disappeared from smartphones. The touchscreen had won, not because it was better for typing necessarily, but because it was better for everything else. When the iPhone launched in 2007, it came with a set of built-in applications: phone, messages, mail, browser, photos, music. You couldn't add new ones. Steve Jobs initially envisioned web apps, programs that ran in the browser, as the way to extend the iPhone's capabilities. But developers wanted more. They wanted to create native applications that could access the phone's hardware, that could run faster and do more. In July 2008, Apple launched the App Store, a digital marketplace where developers could sell or give away applications for the iPhone. At launch, there were about 500 apps. Within a year, there were tens of thousands. Within a few years, hundreds of thousands. The App Store changed the economics of software. Apps were cheap, often just $1 or $2, sometimes free. Developers could reach millions of customers directly, without physical distribution, without retail stores. The App Store also transformed what a phone could do. There were apps for everything: games, productivity tools, social networks, photo editors, news readers, navigation, fitness tracking, banking, shopping. If you could think of something you wanted your phone to do, Someone had probably made an app for it. The iPhone was no longer just the apps Apple included. It was a platform, and its capabilities were limited only by what developers could imagine. This ecosystem model became the template for all smartphones. Google launched the Android market, later renamed Google Play, with a similar structure. Other platforms tried and failed to match it. The app ecosystem was crucial because it meant your phone kept getting better over time, kept doing new things, kept surprising you with possibilities you hadn't considered. The phone in your pocket was never finished. It was always evolving. While Apple was revolutionizing smartphones with the iPhone, Google was working on something else. Android, an operating system for mobile devices built on Linux and designed to be open source. Google acquired Android Inc. in 2005, and by 2008, the first Android phone was released. The HTC Dream, also called the G1, had a touch screen and a slide-out physical keyboard. It wasn't as elegant as the iPhone, but it was cheaper, and it ran Android. Android's advantage was openness. Unlike Apple's iOS, which only ran on iPhones made by Apple, Android could run on phones made by anyone. Manufacturers like Samsung, HTC, Motorola, LG, and many others began making Android phones. This created competition, variety, choice. Android phones came in different sizes, at different price points, with different features. Some had physical keyboards, others didn't. Some had larger screens, better cameras, longer battery life. There was an Android phone for everyone. Google made money not from selling phones or the operating system, but from services. Search, maps, email, all the Google services were integrated into Android, and most Android users used them, generating advertising revenue for Google. This model worked brilliantly. By 2011, Android had surpassed iOS in market share. By the mid-2010s, Android dominated globally, running on over 80% of smartphones worldwide. The iPhone and Android together defined the smartphone era. Apple focused on premium devices, tight integration of hardware and software, a curated ecosystem. Google focused on openness, diversity, market reach. Both approaches succeeded, and together they pushed innovation forward at a pace that would have been impossible with just one company controlling the market. The first iPhone had a 5-inch screen, measured diagonally. At the time, this seemed generous, larger than most phones. But within a few years, screens started growing. Android manufacturers experimented with larger displays, 4 inches, then 4, 5, then 5 inches, and beyond. In 2011, Samsung released the Galaxy Note with a 3-inch screen, and many people mocked it. A phone that large seemed absurd, too big to hold comfortably, too big to fit in a pocket. But people bought them, and they kept buying larger phones. Screens of 5 inches, 6 inches, even 7 inches became common. What had seemed too large quickly became normal, then standard, then small. Apple resisted for years, keeping the iPhone screen at 5 inches, then reluctantly increasing it to 4 inches in 2012. But eventually, even Apple capitulated, releasing larger iPhones with 7-inch and 5-inch screens in 2014. The growth made sense. Larger screens were better for reading, for watching videos, for browsing the web, for everything except fitting in small pockets. And, as phones became the primary computing device for many people, as they replaced laptops and tablets for more tasks, screen size mattered more than portability. By the late 2010s, the average smartphone screen was over 6 inches, more than twice the size of the original iPhone. What we carried in our pockets had become small tablets, portable windows to everything. Smartphones and social media grew up together, each amplifying the other. Facebook launched in 2004, Twitter in 2006, Instagram in 2010, Snapchat in 2011. All of them became mobile-first platforms, designed around the assumption that people would access them primarily on phones, not computers. And they were right. Social media transformed phones from communication devices into broadcasting tools, into stages for self-presentation. You could share photos instantly with everyone you knew, post updates about what you were doing, thinking, feeling, comment on other people's posts, like their photos, follow their lives in real time. The phone became a constant companion, not just for talking to specific people, but for staying connected to a broader social network, a stream of information and interaction that never stopped. Instagram especially was designed around phone cameras. You took a photo, applied a filter to make it look better, and shared it instantly. The entire process happened on the phone, in seconds. Snapchat took this further, making photos and videos temporary, disappearing after being viewed. This ephemerality encouraged more frequent, more casual sharing. You didn't have to curate perfect moments. You could share mundane ones, silly ones, because they wouldn't last. Social media made phones addictive in new ways. There was always something new to check, always another notification, another like, another message. The phone became a source of constant small rewards, little dopamine hits that kept you coming back. Pick it up, scroll, refresh, see what's new. Put it down, then pick it up again a few minutes later. The cycle was endless, and for many people, it was consuming. The first smartphones had slow internet connections. 3G networks, introduced in the early 2000s, were better than the dial-up speed connections that came before, but still limited. Websites loaded slowly. Videos buffered constantly. The mobile internet was useful but frustrating, a pale shadow of broadband connections at home. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, carriers began rolling out 4G LTE networks. LTE stood for long-term evolution, and it delivered on its promise. 4G was fast, genuinely fast, comparable to home broadband for many users. Websites loaded quickly. Videos streamed smoothly. Apps that required constant data connections became practical. Video calls, cloud storage, streaming music, all of it worked because the network could handle it. Fast mobile internet changed how people used phones. You didn't have to wait until you got home to browse the web properly, to watch videos, to download large files. You could do it anywhere, anytime. The phone became your primary internet device, not a secondary one for when you were away from a computer. And as coverage expanded, as 4G became available almost everywhere, the distinction between mobile and regular internet started to fade. It was all just the internet, and you accessed it through the small computer in your pocket. Early smartphones had GPS receivers built in, but the navigation software was often clunky, unreliable, or expensive. Dedicated GPS devices like those made by Garmin and TomTom were better for navigation, and many people kept one in their car. But as smartphones improved, as mapping software got better, phones replaced dedicated GPS units almost completely. Google Maps, Apple Maps, and other services provided turn-by-turn navigation for free, with real-time traffic data, voice guidance, and constantly updated maps. Your phone knew where you were going, and the best way to get there. It could reroute you around traffic jams, warn you about accidents, show you nearby restaurants or gas stations. Navigation became effortless, integrated into the device you already carried. This had broader effects. People stopped memorizing routes or keeping paper maps in their cars. They stopped asking for directions because their phone always knew the way. Getting lost became harder, almost quaint. But it also meant dependence. If your phone died or lost signal, if the GPS malfunctioned, you were stranded in a way that previous generations weren't. The skills of navigation, of reading maps, of orienting yourself by landmarks, began to atrophy. We outsourced that knowledge to our devices, trusting them to always know where we were and where we should go. In the early days of camera phones, the camera was a novelty, a minor feature. But as sensors improved, as lenses got better, as computational photography emerged, phone cameras became serious tools. By the mid-2010s, for many people, the camera was the most important feature when choosing a phone. Manufacturers competed fiercely on camera quality. More megapixels, larger sensors, multiple lenses, optical image stabilization, better low-light performance. Apple, Samsung, Google, and others invested heavily in camera technology, not just hardware, but software. Computational photography used algorithms to improve images, combining multiple exposures, enhancing details, adjusting colors. The results could rival dedicated cameras costing hundreds or thousands of dollars. Phones also made photography social, immediate. You took a photo and within seconds, it was shared on Instagram, sent to friends, posted online. The camera and the sharing platform were integrated, making the entire process seamless. Photography became ubiquitous, constant. People photographed meals, sunsets, pets, themselves, everything. The world was being documented in unprecedented detail. Billions of photos taken every day, stored in cloud services, shared across networks. The quality kept improving. By the late 2010s, phones could shoot in RAW format, record 4K video, capture slow motion at high frame rates, even take decent photos in near darkness. Professional photographers started using phones for serious work, not just as backup devices. The camera phone had evolved from a convenience into a primary creative tool, accessible to everyone, always in your pocket. For most of phone history, charging meant plugging in a cable. Lightning cable for iPhones, USB, or later, USB-C for Android devices. But in the early 2010s, some phones began supporting wireless charging, using a technology called Qi. You placed your phone on a charging pad, and power transferred through electromagnetic induction. No cable to plug in, no port to wear out. Wireless charging was slower than wired charging, and you couldn't use your phone easily while it was charging, since it had to stay on the pad. But it was convenient. You could set your phone down on a nightstand or desk charger without fumbling with cables, especially in the dark. The technology gradually improved, became faster, more efficient. By the late 2010s, many flagship phones supported it, and charging pads appeared in homes, offices, cars, and public spaces. It was a small change, but symbolic. One more cable removed, one more physical connection eliminated. Phones were becoming more self-contained, more wireless. They connected to the internet wirelessly, to headphones wirelessly, and now they charged wirelessly. The tangle of wires that had defined earlier technology was slowly disappearing, replaced by invisible fields of energy and radio waves. Early smartphones had simple security: pins, passwords, pattern locks. You drew a shape on the screen or typed a few digits, and your phone unlocked. But as phones held more personal information, more financial data, more access to important services, security became critical. Biometric authentication emerged as the solution. Fingerprint sensors appeared first, embedded in home buttons or power buttons. You placed your finger on the sensor. It read the unique patterns of your fingerprint, and if it matched, the phone unlocked. It was fast, convenient, more secure than a 4-digit PIN. Apple's Touch ID, introduced in 2013, was the first widely successful implementation, and other manufacturers quickly followed. Later, facial recognition became common. Cameras and sensors analyzed your face, creating a detailed three-dimensional map. When you looked at your phone, it recognized you and unlocked. Apple's Face ID, introduced in 2017, used infrared sensors and sophisticated algorithms to map faces with high accuracy, even in darkness. It worked well enough that Apple removed the fingerprint sensor entirely from newer iPhones, relying solely on facial recognition. These technologies made phones both more secure and more personal. Your phone knew you, recognized you, responded to your unique biological features. It was yours in a deeper way than previous devices had been, but it also raised questions about privacy, about what happened to that biometric data. Who could access it, how it was stored. Security and surveillance were two sides of the same coin, and as phones became more capable of identifying us, the line between protection and intrusion grew thinner. As smartphones grew more powerful, as screens got larger and brighter, as apps ran constantly in the background, battery life became a persistent problem. The first iPhones lasted less than a day with moderate use. Charge it overnight, use it during the day, charge it again before bed. This cycle became routine, expected. Manufacturers tried to improve battery technology, but progress was slow. Lithium-ion batteries, the type used in almost all phones, had fundamental limitations. You could make them larger, but that made phones heavier. You could optimize software to use less power, but there were limits. Fast charging helped, letting you add hours of use with just minutes plugged in. But the basic problem remained. Smartphones consumed power faster than batteries could store it for long periods. People adapted. They carried charging cables, portable battery packs, kept chargers in cars and at work. Low battery anxiety became a common experience. That moment when your phone's battery icon turned red, warning you that power was running out. You would close apps, dim the screen, stop using it except for essential tasks, nursing the remaining percentage until you could reach a charger. The phone, for all its capabilities, was tethered not by wires, but by its hunger for electricity. In the early days of smartphones, notifications were useful. A text message, an email, a calendar reminder. The phone would buzz or chime, and you would check it. But as apps proliferated, as social media platforms competed for attention, notifications multiplied. Every app wanted to notify you. Likes, comments, messages, updates, news, offers, reminders, alerts. The phone buzzed constantly, a stream of interruptions that never stopped. For many people, notifications became a source of stress rather than utility. The constant buzzing demanded attention, pulled focus away from whatever you were doing. You were always being called back to the phone, always being reminded of something you should check, something you should respond to. The fear of missing out, FOMO, intensified. If you didn't check your phone, you might miss something important, or at least something that felt important in the moment. People began managing notifications more carefully, turning them off for apps that didn't need them, using do not disturb modes, trying to reclaim some control. Operating systems added better notification management tools, ways to group them, silence them, schedule quiet hours. But the underlying dynamic remained. Apps and services wanted your attention, and notifications were the primary tool for capturing it. The phone became not just a tool you used, but something that used you, calling to you constantly, demanding acknowledgement. As smartphones became more capable, they absorbed the functions of many other devices. Digital cameras, MP3 players, GPS units, portable gaming devices, e-readers, voice recorders, flashlights, alarm clocks, calculators, notepads, maps, dictionaries, encyclopedias. All of these became apps or built-in features on your phone. This consolidation was convenient. Instead of carrying multiple devices, you carried one. Your phone could do almost anything you needed, and it was always with you. But it also created dependence. If your phone broke or was lost, you lost all those functions at once. And it meant that phones became more central to daily life, more essential, harder to put down or step away from. The consolidation also changed industries. Companies that made dedicated devices struggled or disappeared. Kodak, once synonymous with photography, filed for bankruptcy in 2012, unable to compete with phones. Garmin, the GPS maker, had to pivot toward fitness devices and specialized markets. Flip video cameras, once popular, vanished entirely. The phone was a universal device, good enough at everything that specialized tools were no longer necessary for most people. By the late 2010s, carriers were preparing the next generation of wireless networks. 5G, or fifth generation, promised speeds many times faster than 4G, with lower latency. The delay between sending a signal and receiving a response. In ideal conditions, 5G could reach speeds of multiple gigabits per second, fast enough to download a full movie in seconds, to stream high-definition video without buffering, to support applications that required instant responsiveness. The rollout began in 2019 and continues still, a gradual process of building new infrastructure, installing new towers, upgrading equipment. 5G required higher frequency radio waves than 4G, waves that carried more data but didn't travel as far and were easily blocked by buildings, trees, even rain. This meant denser networks, more towers placed closer together, a massive infrastructure investment. For most users, the difference between 4G and 5G was subtle. Websites loaded slightly faster, videos buffered less. But 5G's real promise was in enabling future technologies. Autonomous vehicles that needed to communicate with each other in real time. Augmented reality applications that overlaid information on the world around you. Remote surgery performed by doctors thousands of miles away. These applications required the speed and low latency that only 5G could provide. The network was being built, not just for phones as they existed, but for what phones and other devices might become. Early smartphones were fragile, vulnerable to water. Drop your phone in a toilet, get caught in the rain with it in your pocket, and it was likely ruined. But by the mid-2010s, manufacturers began adding water resistance to flagship phones. Not just splash resistance, but genuine protection. You could submerge them in water for extended periods, and they would survive. This was achieved through careful engineering. Seals around buttons and ports, special adhesives, redesigned internals that kept water away from sensitive electronics. Phones were rated using the IP system, ingress protection, with numbers indicating how much dust and water they could withstand. IP67 meant submersible in up to 1 meter of water for 30 minutes. IP68 was even better, allowing deeper submersion. Water resistance changed how people used phones. You could use them in the rain, at the beach, in the bathroom without worry. You could take photos underwater, albeit limited by depth. Accidental drops in water, once catastrophic, became minor incidents. The phone survived, dried out, worked normally. It was one less thing to fear, one less way your device could be destroyed by everyday mishaps. Phones were becoming more durable, more resilient, built to withstand the chaos of real life. For over a century, audio devices used a 5mm headphone jack, a simple, universal connection. You could plug any headphones into any device and they would work. Smartphones inherited this jack, and for years it was standard. But in 2016, Apple removed the headphone jack from the iPhone 7, forcing users to either use wireless headphones or connect wired headphones through an adapter. The decision was controversial. Many people still preferred wired headphones, which didn't require charging, didn't suffer from wireless interference, and often had better sound quality. Removing the jack seemed like an arbitrary decision, one made to push people toward Apple's own wireless AirPods. But Apple argued that the jack took up space, prevented making phones thinner or more water-resistant, and that wireless was the future. Other manufacturers mocked the decision, then followed suit. Samsung, Google, and others removed headphone jacks from their flagship phones within a few years. Wireless earbuds became ubiquitous, small pods that fit in your ears and connected via Bluetooth. They were convenient, increasingly affordable, and freed you from tangled wires. But they also required charging, could be easily lost, and created electronic waste when batteries degraded. The removal of the headphone jack was emblematic of a broader trend. Phones were becoming more sealed, more wireless, more dependent on proprietary accessories. Standardization was giving way to ecosystem lock-in, and users, after initial resistance, adapted. They bought the wireless earbuds, charged them alongside their phones, and eventually forgot what it was like to plug headphones directly into their device. In 2019, Samsung released the Galaxy Fold, a phone with a screen that folded in half. When closed, it looked and worked like a normal phone with a small external screen. When opened, it revealed a large tablet-sized display, giving you more screen space without requiring a larger device to carry. It was innovative, futuristic, but also problematic. Early units suffered from screen failures, fragile hinges, and durability issues. Other manufacturers experimented with similar designs. Motorola revived the Razr brand with a foldable phone that mimicked the flip phones of the past, but with flexible screens instead of two separate displays. Huawei, Xiaomi, and others released their own foldable devices. The technology improved gradually. Screens became more durable, hinges more reliable, software better optimized for changing screen sizes. Foldable phones remained expensive, niche products. Most people saw little reason to pay twice the price of a normal phone for a device that folded, but they represented something important. They showed that phone design wasn't finished, that there were still new forms to explore, new ways to solve the tension between wanting large screens and portable devices. Whether foldables would become mainstream or remain a curiosity was unclear. But they reminded us that innovation hadn't stopped, that phones could still surprise us. By the late 2010s, flagship phones had multiple rear cameras, each serving different purposes. A wide-angle camera for standard shots, a telephoto camera for zooming, an ultra-wide camera for capturing more of the scene, sometimes a depth sensor to create portrait effects, blurring the background while keeping the subject sharp. Some phones had 4, even 5 cameras, each contributing to the final image. This multi-camera approach improved photo quality dramatically. You could switch between perspectives with a tap, zooming in or out, capturing sweeping landscapes or detailed close-ups. Computational photography combined images from multiple cameras simultaneously, using algorithms to extract the best elements from each and merge them into a single superior photo. Night mode, introduced by Google and later adopted by others, took multiple exposures over several seconds and combined them to create bright, detailed photos in near darkness. The camera bump on the back of phones grew larger, accommodating these multiple lenses and sensors. What had started as a subtle protrusion became a significant raised section, causing phones to wobble when placed on flat surfaces. But people accepted it. The trade-off was worth it. Phone photography had reached a level where many people no longer needed or wanted dedicated cameras. The best camera, as the saying went, was the one you had with you. And the one in your pocket now had multiple lenses, computational power, and software intelligence that rivaled professional equipment. For years, phone interfaces were designed around bright, white backgrounds. Apps, settings menus, websites, all glowed brightly from your screen, especially noticeable at night. But in 2018 and 2019, both Android and iOS introduced system-wide dark modes, turning backgrounds black or dark gray and text white or light gray. The change was subtle, but significant. Dark mode had several advantages. It was easier on the eyes in low light, causing less eye strain when using your phone in bed or in dark environments. On phones with OLED screens, which could turn off individual pixels to display true black, dark mode, also saved battery life. And many people simply found it more aesthetically pleasing, more modern, less harsh. Apps quickly adapted, offering their own dark modes that integrated with the system setting. Social media platforms, email clients, web browsers, even games. You could switch your entire phone to dark mode with one toggle, and everything would adjust. It became a popular feature, widely used, a small comfort in the constant interaction with screens that defined modern life. The glow of phones at night softened slightly, became a little gentler, a little less intrusive in the darkness. In the early days of the App Store, most apps were purchased once. You paid $1 or $5 or $10, and the app was yours. You owned it, could use it indefinitely. But as the app market matured, developers struggled with this model. A one-time payment didn't generate ongoing revenue, making it hard to support continued development, server costs, updates. Subscriptions became the solution. Instead of paying once, you paid monthly or yearly. For a few dollars a month, you got access to premium features, cloud storage, ad-free experiences. Many apps that had been free with ads or one-time purchases converted to subscriptions. Streaming services, productivity apps, photo editors, news publications, even games. Everything wanted a monthly fee. For users, this created subscription fatigue. $5 here, $10 there, and suddenly you are paying hundreds of dollars a year for apps and services. Managing subscriptions became a chore. Forgetting to cancel trials led to unexpected charges. The convenience of apps was increasingly tied to ongoing payment, and the cost of digital life quietly accumulated. But subscriptions also meant apps could keep improving, adding features, staying maintained and secure. Developers could build sustainable businesses rather than racing to create new apps constantly. The app economy was maturing, finding a balance between creator sustainability and user value, though not everyone was happy with where that balance settled. As phones became more central to daily life, as hours spent staring at screens accumulated, concerns about phone addiction grew. Apple and Google responded by adding screen time tracking features to their operating systems. Your phone would monitor how much time you spent using it, which apps you opened most frequently, how many times you picked it up, how many notifications you received. The data could be sobering. Many people discovered they were using their phones 4, 5, 6 hours a day. Time that had seemed scattered, a few minutes here and there, added up to significant portions of their waking lives. The most used apps were often social media platforms, games, or communication apps designed to be addictive, to keep you engaged as long as possible. Both operating systems added tools to limit usage. You could set time limits for specific apps, schedule downtime when only certain apps worked, filter notifications. But these tools required willpower to use effectively, and the same companies providing them also benefited from your continued engagement. The tension was inherent. Your phone offered both the problem and the solution, tracking your addiction while simultaneously enabling it. For some, screen time data was a wake-up call, a prompt to change habits, to use phones more intentionally. For others, It was just another metric to feel guilty about, another way to measure personal failure. The phone had become so integrated into life that separating from it felt impossible, even when you knew you should. Smartphones collected vast amounts of data. Your location, constantly. Your searches, your purchases, your communications, the apps you used, and when. This data was valuable, used for targeted advertising, for improving services, for purposes users rarely understood fully. Companies like Google and Facebook built empires on data collection, offering free services in exchange for detailed information about your life. Privacy became a growing concern in the late 2010s and early 2020s. Data breaches exposed personal information. Revelations about surveillance programs showed how governments could access phone data. People began realizing how much of their lives were visible, tracked, analyzed, and monetized. The phrase, "If you're not paying for the product, you are the product," became common. Apple positioned itself as privacy-focused, adding features that limited tracking, required apps to ask permission before collecting data, and processed more information on device rather than sending it to servers. Android, more tied to Google's advertising business, was slower to adopt similar measures, but eventually followed. App tracking transparency, encrypted messaging, privacy labels showing what data apps collected, these became selling points. But true privacy on smartphones remained elusive. Phones were designed to be connected, to share information, to integrate with services that required data. Using a phone privately, truly privately, required effort, technical knowledge, and accepting limitations. For most people, the convenience outweighed the privacy concerns. They kept using the apps, accepting the terms, trading information for services, aware of the cost, but unwilling to pay it differently. Early smartphones had limited storage. 8 gigabytes, 16, maybe 32 if you paid extra. You had to manage storage carefully, deleting photos and apps to make room for new ones. But as cloud storage services matured, as internet speeds increased, the storage problem shifted. Your photos, videos, documents, everything could be stored remotely on servers maintained by Apple, Google, Microsoft, or others. Cloud storage made phones feel more spacious. You could take thousands of photos without worrying about running out of space. The photos were uploaded automatically, stored safely, accessible from any device. If you lost your phone, your data remained. If you bought a new phone, everything transferred seamlessly. The phone itself was just a window into your digital life, which existed elsewhere in data centers distributed across the world. But cloud storage also meant dependence on internet connectivity, on subscription payments, on trusting companies with your personal data. If you didn't pay, storage limits kicked in. If servers failed, data could be lost. Your digital life was no longer in your hands, literally. It was distributed, backed up, secured by others. This was convenient, safer in some ways, but it also meant you never fully owned or controlled your own information. In 2017, Apple introduced ARKit, a framework that let developers create augmented reality applications for iPhones. Google followed with Arcore for Android. These technologies used the phone's camera, sensors, and processing power to overlay digital objects onto the real world through your screen. You could point your phone at a room and see how furniture would look before buying it. Measure distances and dimensions. Play games where virtual characters appeared in your physical space. AR applications were impressive, occasionally useful, but remained mostly novelty. The technology wasn't quite ready. Interactions felt clunky, limited by having to hold your phone and look through its screen. True augmented reality would require different hardware, glasses, or contact lenses that overlaid information directly onto your vision. Phones were a stepping stone, a way to develop the software and applications while waiting for the hardware to catch up. But AR on phones demonstrated potential. It showed how digital and physical realities could merge, how information could be layered onto the world around you. Navigation arrows on the street showing where to turn. Translations of foreign signs appearing in your language. Information about buildings or landmarks appearing when you pointed your camera at them. The phone was becoming not just a communication device or a computer, but a lens through which you could see an augmented world, enhanced with data and digital overlays. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic spread globally, forcing people into isolation, shutting down businesses, schools, and public spaces. Phones, already central to modern life, became even more critical. They were how people worked remotely, attended school, stayed connected to friends and family, accessed news and information, ordered food and supplies. Video calling, once a novelty, became daily routine. Zoom, FaceTime, WhatsApp video, tools that let you see loved ones when you couldn't be physically present. Phones also became health tools. Contact tracing apps used Bluetooth to alert people if they'd been near someone who tested positive for COVID-19. QR codes stored vaccination records, proof of health status required to enter buildings or travel. Telemedicine apps let you consult doctors remotely, avoiding crowded waiting rooms. The phone mediated access to the world during a time when the world was dangerous, uncertain, closed off. The pandemic accelerated trends that were already happening. Remote work, online shopping, digital entertainment, all became default rather than alternative. And phones, as the most personal, most portable computing devices, were at the center of this shift. When the pandemic eventually receded, many of these changes remained. The phone's role had deepened, become even harder to separate from daily existence. The chips inside modern smartphones are astonishingly powerful. Apple's A-series chips, Qualcomm's Snapdragon processors, they rival or exceed the performance of laptop processors from just a few years earlier. This power enables everything phones do. The computational photography that processes multiple images in milliseconds. The augmented reality that tracks your environment in real time. The machine learning that predicts what you'll type, recognizes faces in photos, filters spam messages. Modern phones can edit 4K video, render 3D graphics, run complex simulations. They're legitimate computers, more powerful than the desktops that sat on desks in offices just a decade or two ago. And they fit in your pocket, sip power from small batteries, stay cool without fans. The engineering required to achieve this is remarkable, a testament to decades of innovation in semiconductor design, manufacturing precision, and thermal management. This power also means phones keep getting better through software updates alone. Features that weren't possible when the phone was released become available later, enabled by the same hardware, but smarter software. The phone you bought last year can do things it couldn't when you first held it. Capabilities unlocked through updates, through algorithms refined and improved. The device is never finished. It evolves quietly, continuously, as long as it's supported. In remote areas, far from cellular towers, phones become limited. No calls, no data, no connection. But in the early 2020s, technology began emerging to connect phones directly to satellites, bypassing the need for ground-based infrastructure. Apple introduced emergency SOS via satellite in 2022, allowing iPhones to send text messages to emergency services even without cellular coverage, using satellites overhead. This was just the beginning. Companies were developing more capable satellite connectivity, allowing voice calls, data transmission, full internet access through satellite networks. The technology required clear sky views, specialized antennas, careful aiming, but it worked. It promised to eliminate dead zones, to make connectivity truly global, to ensure that anywhere on Earth you could reach out, communicate, call for help. Satellite connectivity was expensive, limited, slower than terrestrial networks, but it filled gaps, provided backup, extended reach. For hikers, sailors, people living in remote areas, it was potentially life-saving. And as satellite networks expanded, as more satellites launched, as the technology improved, the distinction between terrestrial and satellite connectivity might eventually blur. Your phone would simply connect, choosing the best available signal, whether from a tower down the street or a satellite hundreds of miles overhead. By the 2020s, many people no longer carried physical wallets or keys regularly. Phones had absorbed these functions. Mobile payment systems like Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay let you tap your phone to pay at stores, restaurants, transit systems. Credit cards, debit cards, loyalty cards, all stored digitally in your phone, authenticated with your fingerprint or face. Digital car keys let you unlock and start your vehicle using your phone, no physical key required. Smart home systems controlled locks, letting you unlock doors, grant access to visitors, all through apps. Hotel room keys were sent to your phone as digital credentials. Boarding passes for flights, tickets to events, all displayed on screens instead of printed on paper. This consolidation was convenient, but also created vulnerability. If you lost your phone, you lost access to everything. If the battery died, you couldn't pay, couldn't get into your car or home, couldn't board your flight. Backups and redundancy became important. But for most people, most of the time, carrying just a phone was enough. The pocket that once held wallet, keys, and phone now held only phone. Everything else was data, patterns of bits representing access, value, identity. By the early 2020s, the smartphone market had matured. Most people who wanted a smartphone had one. Upgrade cycles lengthened. Instead of buying a new phone every year or two, people kept them for 3, 4, even 5 years. Phones had become so good, so capable, that new models offered only incremental improvements. A slightly better camera, a faster processor, marginally longer battery life. These weren't compelling enough to justify the cost of upgrading frequently. Manufacturers responded by emphasizing durability, longer software support, trade-in programs. Apple promised iOS updates for phones 5 or 6 years old. Android manufacturers extended support periods. Phones were built to last longer, and people expected them to. The frenetic pace of innovation slowed. New models were refinements rather than revolutions. This maturation was natural, inevitable. Every technology eventually reaches a plateau where dramatic leaps become rare. Phones were still improving, but the curve had flattened. The gap between a new phone and one from 3 years ago was smaller than it had ever been. And people were fine with that. They kept using their older phones, satisfied with what they had, waiting until something broke or became unusably slow before replacing it. The era of constant reinvention was giving way to an era of steady refinement. We've traced a long and winding path tonight, from the first electrical pulses clicking through telegraph wires to the powerful computers we carry in our pockets, from wooden poles marching across landscapes to invisible satellites orbiting overhead, from human operators manually connecting calls to algorithms routing billions of conversations simultaneously, from phones fixed to walls to devices that never leave our sides. You've wandered through a century and a half of connection, of innovation built layer upon layer, each generation solving problems and creating new ones, each advancement bringing us closer together and, sometimes, pushing us further apart. You've heard of cranks and rotary dials, of party lines and switchboards, of the first voices traveling through wire, the first texts sent with number keys, the first photos taken on devices meant for calling. The journey from telegraph to smartphone is more than a story of technology. It's a story of human desire. The desire to reach across distance, to hear familiar voices when they're far away, to share moments as they happen, to never be alone, to always be connected. Every innovation we've discussed tonight was driven by that fundamental need, to bridge the gap between here and there, between now and later, between self and other. You are part of this story, woven into its living thread. The phone in your life, the one you likely set down before closing your eyes tonight, is the heir to all of this history. The copper wires, the wooden poles, the operator's patient hands, the inventor's dreams, the engineer's careful calculations, all of it flows through the device you barely think about. When you tap your screen, you're participating in a conversation that started in the 1840s, a dialogue between humanity and distance, between isolation and connection. The atoms in your phone came from ancient stars, forged in supernova billions of years ago. The rare earth elements, the silicon, the metals, all scattered across space and slowly gathered by gravity into planets, into Earth, into ore that was mined, refined, and shaped into circuits so small you need microscopes to see them. Your phone is made of stardust, organized into thinking patterns, into tools for connection. And the connections you make, the messages you send, the voices you hear, they travel not just through space, but through this entire accumulated history. When you call someone, electromagnetic waves carry your voice through air, to towers, through fiber optic cables as pulses of light, through switches and routers and satellite links, arriving milliseconds later as sound in someone else's ear. You're using physics, engineering, infrastructure, protocols, all invisible, all working in concert to collapse distance into intimacy. Tonight, the world is still connected. As you rest now, the networks continue, Undersea cables pulse with light, carrying conversations between continents. Satellites orbit silently, relaying signals across the curve of the Earth. Cell towers hum in the darkness, invisible presences keeping us bound together. And phones, billions of them, rest on nightstands and tables, in pockets and bags, screens glowing softly or dark, waiting, ready to connect at any moment. Someone, somewhere, is receiving news that will change their life. Someone is hearing a loved one's voice for the last time, or the first time in years. Someone is laughing at a message from a friend, crying at words on a screen, feeling less alone because of light and silicon and signals that traveled at the speed of light to reach them. The phone has become the medium through which we experience connection, and through it, we shape and reshape what connection means. The story isn't finished. Phones will keep changing. New technologies will emerge, new ways of communicating, new devices that might eventually replace smartphones as we know them. Augmented reality glasses, brain-computer interfaces, technologies we can't yet imagine. But whatever comes next will be built on the foundation of everything we've discussed tonight. The patient accumulation of knowledge, the solving of countless small problems, the work of millions of people across generations, all contributing to this ongoing project of connection. You are connected, even as you drift toward sleep. Not to your phone necessarily, but to the vast web of human ingenuity that made connection possible. To the operators who patiently plugged cables, to the engineers who designed circuits, to the workers who strung wires across continents, to the dreamers who imagined voices traveling through space. You are the inheritor of their work, the reason all of it mattered. And perhaps, in this moment, you can set the phone aside, let its glow fade, and feel connected in older ways, to the breath moving through your body, to the quiet of the room, to the earth beneath you and the stars above, to the simple fact of existence in this specific moment. The phone brought you information, connection, stimulation, but sleep brings restoration, dreams, the deeper connection to yourself that sometimes gets lost in the noise. The history of phones is the history of trying to overcome absence, to make distance disappear. But tonight, there's nowhere you need to be, no one you need to reach. You can simply rest here, in this moment, present and whole. The world will continue its conversation without you for a while. The networks will keep humming, the signals will keep flowing. And when you wake, it will all still be there, waiting, ready to connect you once again. If you're still awake, if these words are still reaching you, let them be the last thing you hold before sleep. You've traveled through time tonight, through the evolution of connection, and you've arrived here, now, at rest. The phone's journey and your journey have intersected, but now they can separate gently. You can let go, knowing that everything you need to connect is already within you, that the truest communication requires no device, only presence, only breath, only the quiet acknowledgement of being alive. Tomorrow, or later today, you'll pick up your phone again. You'll send messages, make calls, take photos, scroll through streams of information. And now you'll carry with you the knowledge of how miraculous that is, how much history, how much human effort, how much innovation makes each simple interaction possible. Perhaps that awareness will make it feel different, more precious, more intentional. Or perhaps it will simply fade back into routine, and that's okay too. For now, rest. The world spins on. Satellites cross the sky. Cables pulse with light beneath oceans. And you, for this moment, are released from the need to be anywhere else, to connect to anything outside yourself. You are enough, exactly as you are, here in the darkness, breathing, drifting, held by gravity and time and the patient turning of the earth. Sleep well. Dream of stars and signals, of voices across distances, of the invisible threads that bind us. Or dream of nothing at all, just the soft darkness behind your eyes, the gentle descent into rest. Good night.